Good evening, everybody. How do we turn off the share? What have I done now? Advanced sharing options. That's no good. Bingo. There you go. Zoom 6.1. Haven't used the Zoom for a while, so missed out office hours last month, so I'm out of practice. Can someone? Oh no, I need to enable chat, don't I? Is that what it is? Is that why no one can do any chats at the moment? Everyone and everyone. Okay, how's that? Can someone send something on the chat line, see if they can see what's going on? Oh, life is good. Life is good. You can tell I'm out of practice. It's been 2 months since office hours. I missed office hours last month. For noble reasons, I might add. I did a leadership talk for the OD Tug. They do a program for people in IT looking to sort of fulfill their leadership aspirations. And so I did a talk for them. So unfortunately, I had to shunt office hours aside because it's important to give back to your user groups. As you know, I'll talk about that shortly. Let me get rid of that. Let me move a few things around. Let me share my screen and we'll get straight into it. Okay, so hopefully you can still see me. Hopefully you can still see now the screen as well. Move my screen about so I can see what I'm doing. I've got Q&A. I cannot see you. Chat disabled, but can hearing you. Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone can hear me and see me and it's all working reasonably well. Okay, cool. Excellent. No worries. Fantastic. Okay, as I always say, once again, thank you for giving up your time. It's 9 p.m. here in Perth. I imagine it's other times around the world, but yeah, always happy to have everyone together to talk tech. Getting in touch is easy. You can just scan the QR code. That gets you all the normal ways you might want to get in touch with your social media, blog, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, all the various social media things. The @ConnorMcDonald is my Twitter handle. My DMs are always open, always like talking technology. If you want all the gamut of all the ways of getting in touch with me, scan the QR code and you'll go take you to Linktree. As I always say, if this is your first office hours with me, don't panic when you see the slide content not right in the middle. It tends to be pushed aside. That's for when we make it into a YouTube video at the end of this. That's that I can put my ugly mug somewhere on the slides as well, and it's not going to block the all-important content. So I like to start with some bits and pieces as I always do because, as I said, one of the things that is very important to me is community and user groups, and so I like to promote things that are coming up or also some Oracle things just to keep you informed as to what's going on in the world in case you're not as addicted to social media as I am. Now, because I wasn't on office hours last month, you may have heard, I know that this probably was, very quiet, not much hype about it. We released a new database, 23AI. Don't get stuck into me for why we renamed it to C to AI. I don't walk in those circles, but it's 23AI. Thanks to all the people that joined on the launch. I saw the launch on LinkedIn has something like 7,000 people watching. So that was huge. And so, you can obviously download various versions of basically 23AI. There's a Docker image. There's an autonomous Docker image. You can get it on most of our always free instances, and you can download your own free instances as well. Having said that, don't flame me. Don't get stuck into me. I know that a lot of people on the call, like we always are, we're waiting on the general availability release. So please, I don't have any decision-making power over that. All I can say is it'll be ready when it's ready. And even though it gets frustrating for anyone that's wanting to download the full version and wanting to have a play with it, I think the reality is you would prefer that effectively if we found any particular showstopper bugs, I think you'd prefer if we fixed them in-house before we gave them to you. We did have a 23C beta program. It would be rude of us to then say, oh, well, let's do some more beta testing for you guys just by rolling it out prematurely. So hopefully you understand that, yes, we're basically, we want to get the thing out, but yes, we will get it out when hopefully as soon as we possibly can. I'm just making sure I can still see my chat window so I don't lose any chats in case. Come on. So other thing, just this week, Apex 24.1. If you're a developer on the call or a DBA, Apex 24.1, massive release, the first version of Apex that has effectively some artificial intelligence assistance thrown in there as well. Mike, my manager, he did the video launch with Andy Mendelsohn. One of the cool things there is the AI stuff I know everyone's on the AI hype train, but the reality is especially for a lot of what we call citizen IT people, people that use Apex and they don't ever write code. They just basically click and build regions and stuff like that. So things like business intelligence users, just your sort of typical, often in non-IT departments, the ability to go into this thing and say, please give me the SQL, which shows me the total sales, for this year, and they don't have to even know SQL at all, I think is very cool. So I think the AI elements in there will just continue to grow and grow and grow. I keep saying this. If you haven't seen this one, most people, their preferred IDE is VS Code. And therefore, if you want to use VS Code now and talk to the Oracle database, we've got SQL Developer for VS Code as well. Bear with me for one moment. It's in the oven, yes. So just telling my son where his dinner is because he's just come home from sport. What's coming up? From an Oracle perspective, we've got CloudWorld coming up in September. There's a catalog out now. There is. If you go to oracle.com/CloudWorld and search in the content catalog, we've now got a first cut of sessions that are on there, about 400 sessions. There will be a lot more, but these are just a stack of sessions that we know are now locked in. So I was pleased to see that one of mine was on there. So if you're in Las Vegas, please come say hi. But yeah, that content catalog will grow and grow and grow as we add more sessions. But yeah, if you want to get a quick look now, you can already see the kind of stuff that's going to be coming out at CloudWorld. Some user group stuff. The database Netherlands user group are running a database day. Call for papers ends June 25, which is just in a few days' time. So if you're in Europe, please submit a paper. There's no better way of getting started in terms of presenting and building a community around tech by doing a talk at a local user group. Similarly, Swiss user group, I've got something coming up as well, but call for papers ends June 30th. So that's once again just a few days away. So if you want to submit a paper, get into that as well. I promote this one with some sadness. The OC Yatra Tour, run by Sai, which is a fantastic event in India, runs across normally sort of 6, 7, maybe even 10 cities in a very cram-packed sort of couple of weeks. A fantastic event. He's a fantastic organizer of these events, and they're wonderfully successful. I've been to every single Yatra tour, except I can't make it this year due to a clash. I'm seeing some family overseas to catch up with them. So unfortunately, I can't make Yatra for the first time. But if you're anywhere in India, make sure you get along and support that. They do a fantastic job for that event. And later on this year, I've been accepted for the Polish Oracle user group. So I wanted to give a shout out to them there. I'm hoping to get there. So I've been accepted now. Just got to sort out the travel logistics. But yes, hopefully I'll be in Poland. So if you're in the Poland, fantastic event. Once again, it's a relatively small numbers event, but it's basically, as a result, it's a nice, cozy, very strong networking, very strong community kind of event. So get along to Poland if you can. And for me, the next major event for me is I'll be in Nashville in July. So if you're in the US on this call, thanks for getting up early, but also please come along and say hi at Kscope. Fantastic event, very much developer focused. There'll be lots of Apex content there. I'll be doing more focused on database development content, but the two things obviously go hand in hand. Lots of cool stuff there at Kscope. And as I always say for the first 5 to 10 minutes of our office hour session, support your local user groups. Wherever you are in the world, please get along to a meetup. They did it very tough during COVID, but now I think it's more important than ever that effectively you can get along and build those local communities, because that's how we all prosper. And finally, a bit of shameless self-promotion. So bear with me, this will take 10 seconds. Just a little milestone for me. As you probably know, I have a YouTube channel where I put out tech content. I was happy that I hit the 800 video mark this week with the video on how to shrink a table space in 23 AI. Cool feature, but yeah, I'm just a bit chuffed to get to 800 videos. So enough of me gloating. What are we talking about tonight? Let me just make sure I can check the chat. That's fine. Tonight we've got if not exists a 23 AI feature, 23C audit and not exist. So there's a little bit of interesting thing where when we get to 23 AI, you can see I wrote this a while ago, this particular bullet point. When we get to 23 AI, we have to use unified audit. And the issue is, how do we migrate from old style audit, if you're using it, to a unified audit, and what gets missed? We'll do something about leap years. We had a question come in about how to best navigate the issue of leap years when it comes to doing some data expressions. This was actually one question, bind, upgrade, and bind mismatch. Someone came in with one question about the two topics, but I split them out so that we can actually talk about each one individually. ambiguous columns, a common error message and a strange reason why you might see it. And finally, we'll touch on reserved words. Hopefully all these will be relatively quick. So if we can get through all 7 tonight, I'll be very, very happy. As always, sing out on the chat line. The camera is here. The chat line is over there. So I'll do my best to occasionally get back and see it. But yeah, feel free to bang up the chat line if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, etc. And we'll charge along. The chat window is the one I have up. If you do Q&A, I'll probably will see that maybe less frequently. So let's focus on the chat because we're all friends here. Okay, let's get into it. So let's start off with if not exists. Here's the question that came in. In 23C, there is the new if exists, if not exists extensions to the create and drop commands. But the messages in the tools are the same, whether, say, a table was present or not. Is this a bug? And this is coming in 23C, or 23 AI. So I thought I'd show you a little demo of it. It's really designed about continuous integration, continuous deployment, but I'll show you a demo of what the feature is in case you haven't been focusing very much on 23 AI. And then we'll talk about the ongoing discussion and debate that's going in the community about this particular feature. So let's do a new share. So here's the motivation for this particular feature. For a lot of our stuff, when we're doing, in the days of building applications where you deployed them once a year and you very carefully had your set of scripts and you ran them once in production, those days are gone. Nowadays, development, testing, and even in production, we have this thing, continuous integration, continuous deployment. We're running suites of scripts over and over and over. And in particular, in the area of things like, say, unit tests, we're often basically building up an environment, doing the test, tearing it down, and we run those same scripts over and over and again. So here's a sample of a very sophisticated unit test. It's dropping a table, creating the same table again, putting some values in, running a test, and then cleaning up. So that's a script we want to run over and over again. So this is the first time we run it. We drop the table because we've never seen this table before. We get table does not exist, but that's okay. We create the table, we run our insert, and then we start running our tests. And let's face it, unit tests are designed to fail if they find problems. That's why we have unit tests. So in this case, hypothetically, the unit test has failed, and therefore we've crashed. Our unit test has crashed out. So we go in, do some diagnostics, and we see what's going on, and then we're ready to run our unit test again. So the install log for that first run would look something like this. If I've spat it out to stand it out somewhere, I get the 942. Fine, I can ignore that because I don't care about the table. Create the non-existence of the table. I create the table, insert a new value, ran my test, and it died. Once I think I've fixed my code, my application code, I'm ready to run this unit test again. Second time I run it, I run the drop table command, clean up the mess, create my table, insert the row, and run my test. I still haven't fixed the bug, and so the unit test crashed again. But now my install log is different. And this is the fundamental challenge when it comes to what I call acceptable errors. And we've been doing this as DBAs for years, that concept of you run a script and then you sort of look through it and you say, oh, yes, that Oracle error, that doesn't matter. Oh, but this one's a problem, that one doesn't matter, etc. We've had to do this sort of assessment of whether an error is a real error or something that we could have ignored. And that's annoying, especially when it comes to the world of automation. You have this issue of, well, how many Aura 942s can I accept? And then we get this second problem, which is the install log here. Even though we had the exact same problem, I ran my unit test and it crashed, the install log here is different. It doesn't have the 942 anymore. So if I was running these tests over and over again, and I'm doing a diff between the various logs, then once again, I've got complexity. I've got to have my automation tool know that, oh yes, I got some differences, but they're not really differences. All of that is a pain. So what we do is in 23 AI, we extended this to drop table if exists. And it's same with create if not exists, etc. The concept of if the table is there, go drop it. If the table is not there, then we don't report an error. We simply say table dropped again. So in this case now, I run that, insert the value, I run my test. It doesn't matter. The installation logs or the unit test logs will always look the same because drop table if exists will always report the same thing. And then this case, my test ran, it ran successfully, and then I can drop it, etc. If I keep running it, obviously you can see here that this table definitely doesn't exist here, definitely doesn't exist here, and definitely doesn't exist here. This is just to prove to you that even if the table is not there, we get the same message every single time table dropped. Now, there's an alternative here. what if we didn't just have table dropped? Maybe we could have something like this. And these are fake. These aren't actually SQL statements. I've just, I'm pausing for effect here. These are actually, hard-coded demos. So in this case, I could do, if the table exists, then we actually say table dropped. And then I try again, it might give something like table did not exist, some different kind of message, etc. Or it could do something like this. Rather than table did not exist, which might be a bit, sort of cryptic, you might do something like this. Drop table if exists T purge. We could do command processed across all cases. In that way, we're still preserving that intent that a log of this unit test would always have the same output. But some people get upset when they go, well, when you say table dropped, it wasn't really dropped because it wasn't really there. So we had this sort of debate. Let me go back to the slides. So this is an interesting debate. And on the database 23 AI forum, there's a lot of stuff going on. People say it should develop a better experience. It should come out like Postgres does. And then we replied, I think Gerald, the product manager, said, well, the role of the avoid errors is to avoid non-existence checks. It's not about giving you feedback as to whether the table was there or not. If you wanted to do that, you would simply query the data dictionary. And then people say, I want to change. They said, I want create table statement process like the example I showed. Maybe we have command processed rather than table dropped, etc. And then we have this kind of thing is like, someone replied saying, no, that's not done. If not exists as a no op, etc., etc. The definition is we successfully dropped any tables that were there that you requested us to do. The whole point of having a different outcome is the user doesn't care, etc., etc. So this is going back and forth. As it currently stands, it is as I showed in the demo. We always say table dropped, whether you do drop table and it's there or it's not, we say table dropped. But there's this ongoing debate. So it may change in future, it may not. It's sort of in a state of flux. Ultimately, I think it's going to be a tools decision as opposed to a database decision. For me, I would like to have a tool, like for example, SQL VS Code, SQL Developer, etc. The tools where you could maybe set a flag saying, I want some sort of feedback if a table drop command successfully dropped nothing, so to speak. So the tool itself could have maybe some facilities where you could choose what kind of feedback you get. We already have that in SQL Plus, not for this particular scenario, but you've probably seen if you've ever used SQL Plus now in the new 23 AI, you can actually choose the level of errors you get. You can just get the typical error code back, or you can get the error code plus some diagnostics, or you can get the error code plus a link to one of our error message websites. So there's various levels of error reporting now you can get back from SQL Plus, and I think SQL CL has the same. So ultimately, I think this won't be a database call. I think it'll be a tools decision as to how they're going to interpret this. But just to let you know, as it currently stands, it's not deemed a bug, and it simply is, oops, I've gone forward one. It's not deemed a bug. It's simply deemed the fact that we will always say table dropped, whether the table existed or not. And the same holds true for the logical opposite, which is if we create a table and we say create if not exists, if the table is already there, we will simply say table created. So be aware of that when it comes to building your scripts for 23 AI. Okay, messages on the chat line. Okay, Osman's asked, can you add bind equivalent failure when mentioning? Probably get to those topics. We may, but I'm conscious of time. Hemant, still an open debate. We'll continue for some time. Exactly, there is this thing. Dennis has said, does drop table if exists work for views synonyms? Yes. Anywhere where you have drop, anywhere where you have create, you can add now the if exists or if not exists. So you can do drop if exists, if exists user. You can do drop if exists synonym. Any drop now has extension to if exists, and any create has extension to create if not exists. I think even alter. I think alter has the same extension, which if I think I might have done a blog post of that. Yeah, so you basically have alter as well. Someone's saying, is this feature prone to phishing SQL injection by trying out which names which I may not know? That's true, but no more than what you'd normally have already. No more than in the sense that if I have a log onto the database, which I need to do if I'm going to go phishing, I could simply do select count star from table name, right? It's either going to say table of view does not exist, which means either the table may exist, I don't have privileges on it, or the table does not exist at all. I don't know the difference between the two. The exact same will hold true here. If I try to drop table and I do drop table if exists, table name, I'm going to get table drop back whether the table exists if the table does not exist at all. So I've gained no extra information. What have we got here? Users are saying there's no such feature for adding or dropping a column. That might well be the case. But then again, I have another video you can find on one of my 800 videos. You should never ever run drop column command. Always use set unused, but that's for another topic. Okay. Cool. Oh, I got all these people putting stuff in Q&A. Okay, let's do that. Okay, get that. Done. Okay, Madden said, why can't it be like one table dropped or zero table dropped? Yeah, that's the debate that's going on, as in, should we get some sort of feedback as to what happened under the covers? Oracle's current position is no. Our position is we will always give the same output, mainly for the focus of that the unit test output should always look the same, but it's an ongoing discussion. Number 2, audit not exists. Here's the question that came in. We currently use the audit not exists command to track errors in our database. I don't think there's an equivalent policy under unified audit. And how do we accomplish this in 23C/AI? Because in 23, unified audit is the only game in town. And as I said, in fact, I preempted my slide here. When you upgrade from any version of Oracle to 23, we are going to convert your existing audit. Let me start again. I'm telling lies here. When you upgrade from any previous version of Oracle to 23C, the set of old style or traditional auditing commands you have will be migrated over, but they can't be touched. They'll still continue to work. Therefore, an upgrade is not going to break your auditing, because obviously auditing is pretty important, but they are fixed. They can't be edited. They can't be manipulated. All they can be is dropped. And your job now is, if you want to extend your auditing, you now need to use unified auditing. If you want to migrate those, we have some scripts that'll help you. We'll talk about that in a second. But you cannot change those old style auditing commands once you are in 23 AI. All you can do is drop them if you're planning on migrating them to unified audit, but otherwise they're just going to continue running. The concept of being able to manipulate old style audit commands in 23 AI has been removed, because audit style auditing is desupported in 23 AI. Important thing to know. So let's look at the workaround as to how you handle this particular issue of audit not exists, because audit not exists is a traditional auditing command, and there is not an equivalent in 23 AI. So let's have a look at what dramas that might cause. So just to get an idea for what this particular command is, because not a lot of people use audit not exists, let's go through some old style auditing here. You can see I've connected to my version 21 database, PDB 21A, and we'll do some typical traditional auditing. I've said audit select table by Scott. So any select statement that Scott runs, I want to audit select on this particular table, audit select on this particular sequence, and audit an alter table if someone's successfully done it. And this is the one that is a bone of contention. Audit not exists by access. Every time someone does a query or some sort of operation which returns a not exist error, whether it's table view does not exist, user does not exist, etc. Anytime they get a not exist style of error, we capture it in the audit log, which comes back to our point about maybe looking for people trying to do SQL injection, people digging around in your data dictionary. Now, when you come to migrate to Oracle 23 AI, as I said, if you upgraded this particular database, those 5 audit commands would be migrated over, but you can't touch them. And obviously our recommendation is, rather than just leave them in place, we recommend that you convert them to the equivalent in audit policies, which is unified auditing. And the nice thing is, if you head to the MOS note 2909718, we actually give you a script. It'll go read your existing audit settings and convert them to the equivalent unified audit commands, so you can do a nice, easy migration. You don't have to leave them in that fixed unified traditional auditing. So in this case, this is what that script would generate, give or take. It gives them random names that you have to fix up, but this is roughly what we're doing. We're saying create an audit policy now. This is unified auditing for basically select actions on Scott. Do HR select actions on HR employees and HR employees sequence, and any kind of alter table commands we want to create an audit policy for. And this is how we would turn it on. with those audit policies, we then effectively would then apply them to the database. So if I want to pick up any kind of alter table command, the equivalent of going database wide in traditional auditing is everyone except these people in unified auditing. To do HR select, whenever the HR schema does a select on HR employees, we do that. Whenever the Scott schema does a select on the Scott schema, anything in the Scott schema, we audit policy that. And if I want to get rid of those things, I would then get rid of once I've put in my new audit policies in unified audit, this is how I would get rid of my traditional audit settings. And I've made the jump now to unified auditing with the same kind of processing. So this is all cool. But of course, if we look at this, this is what's actually happened. I've implemented, these are my original 5 traditional audit commands, and I've replaced them with these. Now, create audit policy on Scott select, action select, maps to 1. 1 is taken care of. This audit policy looks after 2 and 3. And this audit policy looks after number 4. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we've actually missed this one, because there is no command in unified auditing equivalent to audit not exists. That's obviously a problem for anyone relying on this in traditional auditing because it's gone in 23 AI. So how do we do this? What does this actually do? When you do audit not exists by access, this is what's happening. Let's connect to my version 21 database and do a query against something that doesn't exist. You can see I get this. Audit by not exist does this. I'll turn that off and go back in. And this is what my traditional audit trail looks like. I'm looking at DBA audit exists. This is the sub-element of the DBA audit trail for traditional auditing, and it shows me this is the kind of stuff I capture. This is my name of my machine, this is the owner, this is the object I tried to query, and I got an object 942, etc. So DBA audit exists is the subset of the entire audit trail in traditional auditing that captures all the not exists errors. So if we look at the DDL for DBA audit exists, it actually is, as I said, literally just a subset of DBA audit trail. You can see the definition of the view is just go to my global audit trail, and whenever there was an audit entry for the following return codes, and you're probably familiar with some of these, like table view does not exist, all these other ones, no data found, error code 1, etc. Oh, sorry, or was that unique key? I can't remember. Was that duplicate key? I've forgotten. But all these error codes, stock standard Oracle error codes, are effectively deemed as audit not exist events. So we're just doing normal traditional auditing, and whenever we see one of these things, we actually capture it out of the audit trail. That's what DBA audit exists does. With this information in mind, you can actually come up with a workaround in 23 AI. If the definition of audit not exists is whenever someone gets one of these error codes, we need to log it, well, you could do it with a trigger. I could do something like this. This is how I can mimic audit not exists in 23 AI. Whenever there's an error on the database, if it's 942, that should have been 943, 959, 1418, etc., all those error codes you saw in the previous DDL, then basically stick something in my existing audit trail. I can't insert into the standard audit trail, obviously, but I could actually have a record here of my own version of DBA audit exists, which does all the requisite details. So this is a workaround for 23 AI in order to capture not exist messages. There's the workaround, right? If you want, build yourself a server error trigger such that you can move all your traditional auditing settings over to unified audit, except for the not exists one, and handle that with a trigger, and then you've got your complete auditing back on again. Now, there is a cheeky data pump hack. When I first saw that when we upgrade from any version of Oracle to 23, we preserve the traditional auditing, I reached out to the data pump team and I said, well, that's fine for upgrade, but what if someone's using data pump to upgrade? What if someone is simply doing a full export of their whole database in, say, 19 and simply importing it into 23? Data pump is running DDLs. Surely it's going to get errors saying, no, you can't run traditional auditing DDLs. They're blocked, desupported in 23 AI. Anyway, data pump has a special setting. It effectively says, okay, if it's a data pump import, then I'm allowed to apply these traditional auditing settings on. So if you try run audit select table by Scott, a traditional auditing command in 23 AI, you get an error. You're not allowed to run traditional auditing commands in 23 AI. What you could do is run that command in Oracle 19 in a little schema called Scott, and then data pump that setting into 23. You won't be able to change it once it's there, but you could actually have a new traditional audit setting in 19, data pump it in, and there it is in 23. I wouldn't recommend that as a valid plan of attack because obviously that's going to be a very long-winded, complicated, and hard to document solution. But if you're really stuck in a bind and you want an old style audit command and you don't want to go create a unified audit policy, then you could do something like this. The reason I think it's silly is if you've read anything about unified audit, it's got more power, it's got more flexibility, and it's a lot more efficient on your system. Audit records are cached before being dumped out to the dictionary tables, as opposed to unified audit, traditional auditing, which just simply says, yep, oh, you want to create a record, do an insert. So if you want to reduce the overhead of auditing, then unified auditing is the way to go. So this is for a bit of fun, but if you're stuck in a pickle, you could actually do it. Let's check the chat. Gary's asking, where is the recording of this presentation stored? All of these things, all of the office hours sessions, if you go to asktom.oracle.com and click on the videos tab, every single office hour session is recorded and published. Typically, they come out between 3 and 4 days afterwards. But yeah, so if you have to leave this call or you're just plain bored, all these are recorded. Every single office hour session is recorded and put out there for posterity on asktom.oracle.com. Go to the videos tab and you are good to go. Okie dokie. Let's move on. Yes, one thing I should say is please be aware this was just an oversight on our part. We were unaware of the importance of audit not exist. We generally thought it wasn't a feature that was being used that much by people. And then when we discovered that, yes, people were upset when it disappeared from 23 AI or when it disappeared from unified auditing, which has actually been around since version 12, we said, yeah, okay, we better put this back on the roadmap. So in a future RU of 23, an audit policy equivalent to audit not exist in traditional auditing will come along. Okay, leap year. Got to get a move on. Carson saying, audit not exist via SQL translation framework proc, translate error. I suppose that would be a way of doing it. Yes, I agree. Okay, leap year. Here's the question that came in. We use add months, date column -12, to pick up the same day as last year. But it did not work for us on the leap year just gone by. How do we work around this? And this is a question that came in actually a couple of months ago, and we never got to it in that office hours session. And then I had to defer it to last month, and we didn't do office hours, and therefore we ended up covering it now. But you can think this was basically around about March. Someone asked this question because they imagine they had some pain around February 29. Now I'm going to present you several options for handling this, and I stress none of them you should use, and I'll explain why. Because these are things that we commonly see, and I'm recommending you don't do any of them. So let's explore some of the options when it comes to trying to get two dates that are a year apart. So I'll set a string here, which is 13th of January 2023. And if I'm looking at the total for the sales table for that particular date, I might run a query something like this. Select the sum of sales, sum of the amount from the sales table, where to date of the variable that's been passed in. It's about $48,000. When it comes to doing the same query across 2 years, so let's see how this year went compared to last year. I might do a query like this. Take the input string that came from the user and also take the same string, convert it to a date, take away 365 days, which is a year, and life looks good. I get 13th of January for 2 different years, and I can do an ask, compare, and contrast. Looks like sales went down a bit this year. So that all seems fine, but as you can imagine, once you start getting into leap years, we start getting into problems. If the user input was something like 13th of January 2024, then life's good. I get 13th of January 24, 13th of January 2023. This report goes into production. It's all running fine, of course, until next year. When you do the same thing, minus 365, you get 13th of Jan, but you get 14th of Jan for last year, because obviously 2024 was a leap year and not all years have 365 days. The way people get around this is they use add months, which seems a logical way to go forward to solve all these issues of number of days in a year. We know the number of months in a year is pretty much fixed, never changes from 12. So I take my to-date string, I do add months to the date and take away 12, and life's good. For the 2025, I've solved this problem. I've gone from 13th of January and ended up on 13th of January again. What happens though when we get to a boundary kind of or niche condition, an outlier condition? In this case, I'm looking at the 28th of February, which is the last day of February in 2025. When I take away 12 months, I don't get the 28th of February 2024. Add months is defined in the documentation as if you're doing a month expression and that the date you're using is the end of a month, they will always pick the end of the month that is the result of the expression. So when I go back a year, I don't get the 28th of February, I get the 29th of February because this started at the end of the month, and add month says you started at the end of a month, so I'll give you the end of a month, even if I have to tweak the arithmetic a little bit. So I'm back to the same problem. Maybe we can skip the months thing. Maybe we can go to intervals. So let's take 28th of February 2023 and take away a year from it. Okay, and it solves the problem. See, I went from 28th down to 22. That's good, but it doesn't work in all cases. If I start with the 29th and try to take a year, an interval of a year away from the 29th of February, it just bombs out. It's funny how, unlike add months, it doesn't go, that's the end of a month. Maybe you want to go back to the 28th. It simply says, there is no 29th of February 2023. I can't help you. So these are some of the issues you have as problems. Now, all of these are really handling niche, outlier, or boundary cases. So you could actually work around it with, say, a case statement. For example, if the incoming is the 28th of February, then we can make sure, and effectively we're in a leap year, then we could say, let's take away 366 instead of 365, or, add months minus one, etc. So we could diddle the arithmetic for these boundary cases if we wanted to. And these are some of the ways you could work around these problems just by looking at the problem dates, end of February in particular, and adjusting things as we go. Here's why I say none of those things will work, even though that last case statement seems to solve the problem for all the particular dates. Let me look at this example for you. I'm picked 7th of April 2023, and I'm doing that same comparison, for sales across 2 years. For 7th of April 2023, my sales were, that's resizing badly. My sales were 2,600. Well, that's a catastrophe. Oh my goodness, that was an absolute disaster because it was $44,000 last year. Now, who knows their calendar really well? Anyone have a guess as to why sales were just absolutely disastrous on the 7th of April 2023? Weekend sales, almost. Good guess. You're on the right track. I'll give you a hint. The 7th of April is a Friday. And yes, 7th of April 2023 was Good Friday. And pretty much in this particular case, so many parts of the Western world, Good Friday is very quiet, in terms of a business sense, right? Even in the USA, I don't think they get Easter Monday off, but just about everyone takes Good Friday off around the world. So it's just one of those things where the moment you say, I'm going to rely on the arithmetic, just lobbing a year off something, you're always going to get these anomalous issues. So my recommendation is, even if you can fix it with arithmetic, don't do it. If you genuinely want to compare 2 years worth of data, then what you want to do is create a mapping table. Effectively, you want to map a current date with effectively its appropriate date from last year. Now, for the vast majority of those things, they will literally be a one-to-one mapping. 1st of January on each year is New Year's Day. For some countries, that might be huge sales. For some countries, it might be no sales, depending on their holiday situation. But there's a reasonable mapping between the two for things like this way, right? For the 2nd of January, well, for me, for the following year, I might choose the 3rd of January because that's the first Tuesday of the new year. That solves things like one day being a Sunday, one day being a working day, etc. And this continues on. For example, this is for the Wednesday. This one I got the Thursday, etc. It might be this one, for example, the 29th of February this year fell on a Thursday. Well, for next year, or for the previous year, I might choose the closest Thursday because I'm trying to compare, for example, 2 Thursdays and so forth. For example, for Good Friday, I might be something actually a long way apart because Good Friday falls all over the place. And generally, I want to compare these common things which are due to some sort of reason. So that's what I would recommend. And then you just simply do a join. Now, yes, I know that's a bit of work you have to do at the start of each year to do that mapping. But any other form of arithmetic is never going to give you as good a result as that. Okay. Yes, MSA, ERP and bank systems use their own calendar tables that list holidays across countries, etc. Yeah, this is obviously this date map is a trivial example. I remember working at a customer here in WA. They do gambling, and so for them, they had all these, their date dimension table in the data warehouse had literally, 50 or 100 columns, all with different variants of the fiscal year, the fiscal week. They had certain amount, their fiscal weeks went from Thursday to Thursday, all sorts of strange permutations, but they had all these things in there for each year so they could do genuine cross-year comparisons. Let's go back to the slides. So as I said, there are plenty of arithmetic options you can use to overcome any errors and anomalies, but please just suck it up, take that hit, and once a year, load up a date mapping table, and you won't regret it. Don't rely on the arithmetic. Okay, binding. Oh, time's running out. These will be quick ones. Okay, so this will look like two questions identical because it actually was one question, but I split it into two such that we could actually talk each one individually. Here's the question that came in. We are getting very high version counts on one of our update statements. We looked in VDOL SQL shared cursor. Let me say that without too many H's. We looked in VDOL SQL shared cursor and it was bind upgradable. What does that mean? Let's have a look at a demo. I'm going to create a table called T, very simple, put a single row in it, and let's run some queries. I create a variable called V and its value is test. And I do a select star from T where C1 equals the bind variable, and I get one row back. That's good. Let's try some other values. So now I'll make effectively V a longer test. So I have to make my variable a bit larger, and I run a query, and I can do an even longer one. So longer test, it's 1,000 bytes. No row selected because there's only one row in there. And this is what happens. I got 3 versions of that one query. Here's my query, and in VDOL SQL shared cursor, it occurs 3 times, and these are the 3 children. So bind length upgradable sort of gives you an idea of what's going on here. What the database does is if the variables being used as binds are significantly different in size, then we'll choose not to share those cursors. And I think the logic here is relatively sensible. That is, the likelihood of you doing select star where column equals A versus column equals 10,000 lines of text, the odds of those two things needing the same plan might be fairly low. And so we have these multiple cursors. And you can actually see what's going on. If I go look in VDOL SQL bind capture, it'll show me what the database imposed in terms of data types. Our variable was 10, 100, and 1,000 bytes long. But the database said, well, I'm going to map you to some certain ranges here. So for the first one, it said, yep, anything up to 32 characters is version number 1 of this SQL cursor. Then I got up to varchar 2 2000, and then when I got larger than that, I went to varchar 2 4000. These are the ranges that the database will choose. Now the question is that all the ranges, or are there ones in between I didn't see because of the size I used? So I wanted to explore this. So if I go up to varchar 2 32,000, this database is set to max string size extended, and I run again. Yes, I get a 4th one. This one 32768. Is this all of them? I won't run this for you today because I tried this earlier on today and it ran for too long. But what I did was I wrote myself a script that simply did, let's try varchar 2.1 and run the query. Let's try varchar 2.2, run the query. And I went all the way up to 32,000. So every possible variable size between 1 and 32,000. And when I ran it, this is the output. I get 7. I can go varchar 2 32, 128, 2000, 4000, 8192, 16386. I'm surprised it wasn't the actual, perfect multiple, and 32767. So you get 7 possible versions for a varchar 2. Now the question is, that's all well and good. That all makes sense, but who writes applications where every single bind variable size is being used? Like if I'm writing something in Pure SQL or even in SQL Plus, something like this, it strikes me as odd. I would probably just set a variable to say varchar to 1,000 and then put all sorts of different sizes in it. What kind of applications do these strange things where they're actually specifically choosing lengths for every single bind variable? The question is, why do we see that? And the answer is relatively straightforward. It's those damn 3GLs. So this is a cut and paste from a odp.net application. And we can see here there's select star from emp where enum equals a bind variable. And this is what we commonly see. I'm going to create a new bind parameter. It's going to be a long varchar2, and then you can actually choose the size of the bind. And so, for example, in here, if I look at the length of my employee name that's coming in, if it's 17 bytes, I'm telling the database the bind is 17 bytes long. Next employee is 12 bytes long, I tell it's 12. So it's these kind of 3GLs where you nominate explicitly the length of the bind that you can start to see these issues of. So just need to take care with 3GLs, things like ODB.NET, Java, etc. So if you're worried about this, then pick some standard sizes. Now, that's not a big deal. If you get a few cursors like we just saw there, that's the way the database is designed to work. The reason this original question came in is they had an update statement where they're updating some 150 columns. Now, once you have 150 columns, and each one of those columns could be up to 8, as we saw, different bind sizes, well, what's that? That's 8 to the power of 150. That's a lot of permutations, and you get these massive version counts for particular SQL IDs. So if you've got statements with lots and lots of binds, especially if they're varchar2s, maybe pick up a set of consistent sizes to make sure the cursor counts don't go out of control. Now, there are some underscore hidden parameters that you can use on the advice of Oracle support that actually will limit the amount of versions you're allowed to have no matter what happens. But my view is, as always, is I'd rather not rely on underscore parameters. I'd rely on basically quality code as well to actually get this kind of stuff. Okay, question. Gary's going, is it possible to send your GitHub locations? Yes, if you, that very first slide, you'll see it at the end here, linktree/Connor. That has my GitHub repo as well. Look inside the MISC scripts, and there's all the Office Hours scripts. I put them in there from time to time. I'm not particularly diligent about it, but I do try to put them all in there from time to time, so you should be able to get them. Bind mismatch. Same customer, just slightly different variation on the theme here, but we'll present it as a brand new question. Oh, Q&A. Yeah, make sure you can join with IW in day of the week. Oh, yes, that's back on their other things. Sorry, I missed that. I was only focusing on the chat. Okay, bind mismatch. Here's the question that came in. We are getting very high version counts on one of our update statements. We looked at VDL.SQL shared cursor and it was bind mismatch. What does that mean? Let's look at a demo. So I create a table called T. Let's do varchar2 10 v1 equals test and do a query. I got nothing out of there. Let's now change the variable to a number and try that, and we got nothing out of there. Let's now try and change the variable to a binary double and do a query. So we got the exact same query, but this time the data type of the bind variable changed. If I go look at VDL.SQL shared cursor, every time you have a different data type, you get a different cursor in there, because you can't obviously use the same information about a numeric bind versus a string bind. That could create all sorts of dramas. And so you get a version for each of the different data types you used. There's an obvious question here. Who is writing applications where for the same SQL statement, they are dynamically changing the data type of the variable? That sounds insane. And let me show you why this happens, because it's a really common occurrence. 3GLs. This is a real common mistake. This is the most common example I see of this situation happening. And that is, as always, developers, all of us sometimes struggle with nulls. And in, for example, a 3GL such as, say, Java, we have code that looks a bit something like this. Someone's got an employee number that's coming in. It might have come from a user input. It might have come from some other part of the application, etc. And we say, okay, is it null? Is it null? I'm going to set a null for my bind variable because this bind variable is null. But if it's not, well, it's definitely an integer. And so this is what I do. So if it's null, pass in null, otherwise set an integer. This looks harmless enough, but it's actually a flawed code. We don't ever want to pass in this as effectively your value. Even though we think I'm setting null, I pass in a null, because what I'm actually doing is passing in a varchar2 when you do that. You pass in a null as a bind, the database assumes it's a string, which means depending on how this is run, you're either binding a varchar2 or you're binding an integer. Then we look at the hire date. I'm either binding a varchar to or I'm binding a date. If I've got dozens and dozens of different bind variables, all of which might be null, then you can start this issue. We have lots of different permutations for a particular SQL because effectively you're doing two data types, two possible data types for every single bind variable. This is what we want to be doing, right? In fact, I might have a typo here. You can actually say, I want to pass in a null. I think I'm actually meant to, this is a typo here. I actually pass in still the value of null, and then I nominate the data type as the third parameter. But yes, I'm actually passing in an integer because even though it's a null integer. Even though it's null, it's a null date. If you do that, then we're always casting the data types correctly. So once again, this is a common an issue that often comes out of 3GLs, and in particular when it comes to handling nulls. That's the most common occurrence. So as I said, beware the dreaded null. That's the thing you need to be aware of, because that's where you get these. It seems odd that we would get different data types for the same bind variables, but the most common example is nulls being treated as strings. Okay, we get one more done. Ambiguous columns. Here's the question that came in. When we use insert and union all, we keep getting the error or a 918 column ambiguously defined, but this is intermittent. Do you consider this a bug in the database? No, I don't. Let's explore what's going on. Let's create a table called T, X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to do an insert. So the question came in saying it's insert and union all are causing us dramas. So I'm going to insert, select 110.10 from Joule and 198.99 from Joule. That works fine. And here's where things get interesting. Let's say this is a complicated SQL, and as I often recommend, if you've got complex SQLs, my dog has come to join me on the call. If you've got complex SQLs, one of the things you can use is a with clause to compartmentalize it. So I'll throw a with clause in there, and I get column ambiguously defined. What's going on there? It literally is the same thing. There's the same select, but I put a with statement around it, and now it's broken. So this person was saying, oh yes, it's insert, it's union all, etc. So let's dig around. Maybe it's the with. If I take the with out, nope, same problem. Maybe it's the insert. If I take the insert out, nope, still doesn't work. So maybe it's the union all. If I just do one, nope, same thing. I get the same error. So it's not an insert issue. It's not a union all issue. It's not a with issue. It's this issue. Someone's saying 5 minutes to Apex office hours. Yes. And I will say, rarely I kick people off on my own sessions. Apex 24.1, you really want to get involved in those Apex office hours. They'll take a couple of minutes just to get introduced themselves and stuff. So we'll get this one done. It's only got a couple more demos to go. What's going on here? So if I run this, if I run select 10, 1, 10, 20 from Joule, that's fine. It doesn't fall over, whereas this one does. And that gives you a hint when you look at the output from SQL Plus. It's deciding on column names based on this literal data. So if I try use DBMS utility expand SQL text to see what's going on with the problematic SQL, unfortunately it can't. DBMS utility expand SQL text needs a valid SQL, and which this is not. But if you take the one that did work, you can see what happens when you actually expand this into what the database sees. The database says, take each one of these and give it a column alias, and the column alias is the literal value. So I've got 10, 20, 10, 20, 120, 110 and 20 for my aliases, and then I query them, do this outer query. So what happens, of course, is when I try to do something with 1, 10, and 10, I get two columns with a name of 10, and that column ambiguously defined. So the solution is very simple. Even if you're just selecting literals, if there's a chance that you have the same literal more than once, then just make sure you have an alias. And I think this is just good practice anyway. As a result, once that's sorted out, then yes, I can go back to my with statement, my union all, and my insert, and it all just works because I took the effort of putting in an alias. So on that note, we can say, we've always said, have aliases as part of your standards. It's not just about good documentation. It's not just about good coding practice. It's not just about maintainability. It can stop your application from actually falling over. So keep that in mind. And with that note, we are done. Just for Gary, if you're still on the call, that QR code will take you to my GitHub repo plus all the other stuff as well, or just go to linktree/Connor. You'll find my GitHub repo there, and my office hours scripts from time to time get put up there. So it's 9:59 based on my clock. So we did get in 1 minute ahead of schedule because that'll give you just enough time to disconnect from this call and head over to the Apex one. That's pretty much what I'm going to do. As always, thank you very much for your time. Great to be back doing office hours, having missed last month. Next month, hopefully I'll get an office hours done. I might be stuck at Kscope, but if not, we'll sort something out somehow. As always, awesome to have you on the chat line and being interactive. I love it when people are having some debate and discussion. And yeah, as always, we'll see you next month on office hours. And thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the Apex webinar. Bye for now, everybody.